Is the United Kingdom in chaos due to xenophobia, immigration, and deportation plans to Africa? The United Kingdom is currently grappling with its worst wave of civil unrest since 2011. Police vehicles have been set ablaze, and officers have become targets. Amid the chaos, angry crowds chant, "We want our country back." This is the stark reality facing the UK, a nation swept by a wave of unrest fueled by rising xenophobia, anti-immigration sentiments, and Islamophobia. It is surprising that such an occurrence could happen in a country once regarded as one of the most immigrant-friendly in the world. However, in recent years, the UK has made significant missteps, leading to simmering tensions that have now erupted into violence. Where did the UK go wrong? To understand this, we must revisit the pivotal moment on June 23, 2016, when crowds jubilantly celebrated the UK's decision to leave the European Union (EU) in a referendum known as Brexit. One of the primary reasons behind this decision was immigration. The EU's policy of free movement allowed all its citizens to live and work freely in any member state, which, as the EU expanded to include countries like Poland and Hungary, led to an influx of migrants from less developed nations into the UK. Many Britons voted to leave the EU to curb this migration from poorer Eastern European countries seeking a better life under EU citizenship rights. The Brexit referendum was narrowly decided, with 52% voting to leave and 48% wishing to remain. This marked a moment of deep division within the UK. Paradoxically, after making this decision, the UK realized that Brexit did not reduce immigration but instead led to record numbers of immigrants entering the country. So, why did this happen? Let's break it down. While Brexit did prompt a wave of emigration from the UK, 200,000 EU citizens left the country in 2021 alone. The UK failed to recognize its vulnerabilities. The English Channel, known in French as La Manche, is a narrow stretch of sea between the UK and the northern coast of France. It is one of the smallest and shallowest seas surrounding the European continental shelf, with the narrowest point being the Strait of Dover, just 34 kilometers wide. These characteristics have turned the area into a hot migration route in Europe. Just across the channel, about 30 kilometers from Dover, lies the French city of Calais. The first wave of migrants arrived in Calais in the 1990s, fleeing the collapse of Yugoslavia. By 2015, refugees from the wars in Afghanistan and Syria had also arrived, and a refugee camp on a former landfill site near a chemical plant on the city's outskirts grew into a vast slum known as the jungle. The population swelled to around 9,000 people. In September 2016, the French government decided to close the jungle camp. However, just months later, hundreds of asylum seekers returned despite regular police crackdowns. Many of these migrants did not intend to stay in France long-term. Their ultimate goal was the country across the Channel. Ironically, one of the factors drawing them was Brexit, which offered deported EU migrants a second chance to seek asylum. Before Brexit, the UK's EU membership allowed it to return asylum seekers to other EU countries they had passed through, such as France, under the Dublin regulation, which aimed to prevent asylum shopping. However, by leaving the EU, the UK also exited this system. Thus, in their quest for a promised land, desperate migrants began boarding small boats to cross the Channel to the UK, evading French authorities. Some risked the journey in rough seas and bad weather, sometimes departing in such haste that they failed to inflate their boats fully or install sturdy floors. Boats that initially carried an average of 20 people now often carry up to 50, increasing the risk of tragedy. In April 2024, at least 5 people, including a 7-year-old girl, drowned when they fell from a boat carrying 112 people. Brexit also made it harder for EU citizens to move to the UK for work, while non-EU migrants flocked to the UK with work permits to fill vacant jobs. In summary, Brexit pushed EU citizens out of the UK but attracted migrants from non-EU regions. In 2023, over 500,000 people left the UK, while 1.2 million immigrants entered, 97% of whom were from outside the EU. As tragic stories of thousands making the dangerous sea journey from France began to affect public opinion in the UK, the British government responded with a controversial strategy rather than addressing the humanitarian crisis. In April 2022, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson proposed the idea of deporting illegal migrants to Rwanda, East Africa, to seek asylum there. The plan was so flawed that, after 2 years of implementation, the government spent hundreds of millions of pounds, faced multiple court rejections, and yet no flights to Rwanda had taken off. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak admitted that no flights would occur before the July 4 election. However, as we know, Sunak's party lost. And the new government, which had vowed to scrap the plan during the campaign, took power. Debates over immigration were reignited at a time when the UK was facing unprecedented challenges: a stagnant economy, soaring inflation, an ongoing housing crisis, and a government admitting the nation was bankrupt. If you watched our previous video discussing the difficulties facing the UK economy, you'd know that the current situation is largely self-inflicted. When we talk about inflation, the EU is one of the UK's largest trading partners, but Brexit meant that British goods and services were no longer tariff-free in the EU. As a result, the costs and bureaucracy for both exports and imports with the EU have increased, especially for food. Meanwhile, the UK lacks many alternative sources to compensate. Another inflationary impact of Brexit has been the reduced labor supply. While immigration numbers surged post-Brexit, it is crucial to note that the composition of this influx differs significantly from the temporary, relatively cheap labor supply that used to come from Eastern and Southern Europe, particularly students and unemployed family members. Severe labor shortages in various sectors have driven wages up. Since wages contribute to production costs, many companies have chosen to raise prices, further eroding the UK economy. The problem is that the UK chose to leave the EU, and some people refuse to admit they were wrong. They need someone to blame, and so a portion of the British population insists that immigrants are responsible for the economy's sluggish growth since 2008. High inflation, the scarcity of affordable housing, and overcrowded schools and hospitals are all because of immigration. These sentiments have simmered for years, and by late July 2024, they found the perfect spark to ignite. On July 29, a horrific incident occurred in a dance class in the town of Southport, in the west of England. We will not go into details as it is too distressing. Unfortunately, before the suspects' identities were confirmed, false claims spread on social media that the perpetrator was a Muslim asylum seeker who had arrived in the UK by boat. This misinformation spread so rapidly that British police had to break protocol to reveal that the suspect was a 17-year-old born in the UK. Despite this, the rumors continued, igniting a riot in Southport on July 30, even before the families of the children involved had a chance to grieve. Over 200 people descended on Southport, with many traveling by train from other parts of the UK to the town to pay their respects to the victims. While some laid flowers and toys near the crime scene, a violent mob chanted, "We want our country back," and attacked a mosque. They smashed police cars, threw bricks at officers, and injured over 50 public servants. This event was the first spark in a wave of riots. Extremists gathered in towns and cities across the UK, brandishing anti-immigration and anti-Islam slogans, causing riots, clashing with police, and vandalizing infrastructure. Thousands of people were estimated to have engaged in acts of destruction. Over 400 rioters were arrested, with 120 facing court sentences. However, it was too late. Over the years, British politicians and the media had ignored the growing racial and religious hatred. The fire had been smoldering within society, with Muslims being the primary target. It wasn't until recently that it was discovered the government's anti-extremism task force, which targeted Muslims, had been inactive for over 4 years, despite repeated government promises to address the issue. The newly elected Labour government has yet to present a clear strategy to tackle the problem of anti-Muslim sentiment. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been criticised for not actively engaging with the Muslim community after the riots. The Southport incident was almost a flashpoint protest and a wake-up call to a UK more divided than ever. Perhaps at this moment, the more rational Britons wish they could turn back time to June 2016 and reverse everything, but it is too late. The British government will need many years to resolve this issue, and peace-loving British citizens must endure these temporary instabilities in the hope of a better future. Ultimately, what we need now is calm, so we can find better solutions instead of giving in to anger and further chaos.